Y'all know what it is.
Hey guys, welcome back to the show. Today we have a very special guest. This is a conversation that I've been looking forward to for quite a while now. Today our guest is Todd Henry. Todd is the founder of The Accidental Creative, a company that helps creative people and teams be prolific, brilliant, and healthy. He regularly speaks and consults with companies about how to develop practices that lead to everyday brilliance. Todd is also an author of several top-selling books, including The Accidental Creative, Die Empty, Louder Than Words, and Herding Tigers. So without any further delay, please welcome our special guest, Todd Henry.
Todd, how are you? Welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much for making time for us. I know you're a busy guy and your schedule's hectic, and we really appreciate you making some time for us. You actually have the honor of being the very first author in my Audible library. Very first book I ever bought.
It's great.
Yeah, Words. Z-Trip tweeted about it, and I was like, I'll check this out. And got Audible, and I downloaded this book, and that led into I have over 100 purchased audiobooks now, and everything from Accidental Creative, Louder Than Words, Simon Sinek, all the good ones stemmed from your book. So thank you so much.
Fantastic. But when I saw that incredible vinyl collection behind you, I should have known that Z-Trip was involved somehow in this whole thing.
Yeah.
Yep. No doubt. Well, and it's really funny. So we've been doing this show for going on almost 4 years now, and you'll be somewhere near episode 194 or 5, something like that. And your books, I come from the advertising industry, so I'm sort of a creative in the sense that I'm an art director, designer by trade. And Mike actually introduced your book to me shortly after having discovered it himself. And Mike comes to creativity through sort of the music side. So he's a director or a DJ and club producer, where I came into music through, I was a tour manager and stuff like that for a while. And so we spent we have all these interesting creative crossroads, but they both sort of manifest through your book. So it's kind of an interesting amalgamation of things, I suppose.
Well, it's great to know that work can cross over, right? I guess it kind of shows us like creativity is creativity. I mean, if you're solving problems regardless of your industry. And, a lot of the same dynamics and pressures and pitfalls and all of that affect all of us, regardless of our profession, regardless of the kinds of problems we're solving, whether it's music or it's, advertising or creative or design or copywriting or entrepreneurship. Creativity is problem solving. And so, I think often we don't see those commonalities, but it's great to see that playing out.
Yeah, well, and it's funny too, from the beginning of this podcast, we had in our early days, we had a really hard time sort of classifying what it was we did, right? And we were talking to our friends mostly in the early phases, who do we interview? Oh, well, call some guy And, but what we started to notice after we developed a little bit of a backlog was that there's this creative thread that runs through everybody. It's just a matter of how we apply it, right? So we were talking to musicians and artists and startup founders and CEOs and, all these different people. But what fuels them is all the same thing, whatever it is, this creative thread or this juice that exists in all of us. And so I wondered if we could start going back a little bit on your creative juice and see if we could maybe understand a little bit, how you got to where you are today. I mean, obviously, we know you as an author and a convention speaker and the guys doing the business circuits. But, what was it like before that? How did you get into this?
And actually, I know you played in a band before. You were a musician, and I tried to look you up to see who you were and see what it was all about. And there's two bands that I found that out. The only thing I could find is there's a reggae band with your name. It's like an old, not you. And I figured that probably was the case. And then I found an article from 2001 as a country singer. Is this correct?
That would be correct. Yes. I think that is the only thing in existence that in any capacity, speaks about this whole deal. I'm almost 50 now. So I did all my experimentation pre-Google, which was kind of nice, because none of that really exists anymore. Matter of fact, when people ask me about building a personal brand, I say, well, the best way to do it is just go back and do all of your experimenting before Google was a thing. And then you don't have to worry about it. You build it from scratch, playing music, performing, writing, songwriting, traveling, performing shows. And so I thought, maybe I'll make a go of this. So I spent a significant amount of time in Nashville. I'm based in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I was playing shows. I was in Nashville. I was writing music, collaborating with people who, some of whom went on to do amazing things, But yeah, I actually played West Coast Bakersfield country music, sort of Buck Owens, Dwight Yoakam, the Mavericks, that kind of stuff. Got to do a bunch of great shows with the Dixie Chicks at the time. Diamond Rio and Toby Keith and Kenny Chesney, and got to play all these incredible shows, and it was really fun. And at the same time realized, as anybody who's been associated with the music business knows, it's either it goes or it doesn't, right? There's kind of this giant middle ground where it's really hard to make a living in the music business. And so just realize I don't think this is probably the best path forward long term. And I wanted to, get married and have a family and all that. So, life doing that is not as easy. So, ended up through a variety of circumstances, ended up getting a job as a creative director for a nonprofit, which was fantastic. Spent the next decade doing that, leading teams, building a team of people. We built a team to, 36 or so people over the course of that time. And in the midst of that, as I was trying to lead this team, as I was trying to figure out how do I keep them what I began to call prolific, brilliant, and healthy at the same time, realized that many of the other organizations in our city, the creative directors, are having similar conversations. So I started just getting together with people who were creative directors, executive creative directors from some of the biggest firms in our city. Cincinnati, I know a lot of people who aren't familiar with it think Cincinnati, Ohio, what? But, we're the home of Procter & Gamble. We're the home of Macy's. We're the home of Kroger. There are several huge companies that are based here, and Procter & Gamble is kind of the cradle of brands, right? So there are all these design and creative agencies, brand firms here in Cincinnati dedicated to serving basically Procter & Gamble or Kroger or Macy's or some of these companies that are built here or based here. So there's a big creative presence here. So spent a lot of time kind of working with them and sort of just asking questions and sort of seeing what they were asking, and realized there needs to be a forum to talk about the pressure to create on demand. So in 2005, started a podcast called The Accidental Creative, kind of on a whim. Didn't really mean to, but it just kind of happened. It didn't really mean for it to be anything. I just released, about 5 episodes just saying hey, here are some things I'm noticing, some conversations I'm having. Kind of forgot about it because I was busy. I was working a 60+ hour a week job, So I kind of forget about it. And I go back to iTunes at the time to look for podcasts to listen to, because this was kind of a new thing, right? And there was one called The Accidental Creative that was one of the top podcasts on iTunes. And my first thought was, oh no, I stole someone else's idea. Why didn't I check first to make sure? But it was my podcast that was one of the top podcasts on iTunes, which is crazy. So there were thousands of people listening to this thing right out of the gate. And I realized I'd kind of stumbled into something that I was really meeting a need, that people really wanted to have these conversations about creating on demand. And so began to really sort of bolster that and build it up, and then started getting invitations to go speak at some incredible companies. So it's funny, I was taking my vacation time. I think for about 3 or 4 years, my family basically just did weekend getaways. We didn't go on vacation for 3 or 4 years because I was using all my vacation time to go speak. I would fly across the country to speak at some giant company or some conference or something, fly back overnight, and then be at an 8 o'clock meeting the next. I mean, it's kind of crazy, the stuff that we were doing. And then realized okay, this is kind of where things are going. So left, started my company, was offered a book deal with Penguin Random House, which was, well, it was just Penguin at the time, which was great. That was the first book. The book did well. And so that was, I guess, 12 years ago. And now for the last decade plus, I've been traveling, consulting, writing books. I just published my 5th book with Penguin Random House. And so that's kind of the very long arc of, how I got to doing what I'm doing today.
No, I think that's super useful. And it's funny, maybe apropos of today. So today is Mike's birthday, actually. And he's not quite there, but he's pushing 40. You're pushing 50, and I'm somewhere right in the middle. And so one of the discussions we were having prior to the show is, this idea that, we were trying to, I guess, sort of estimate when you may have written this first book, and when these sort of things started to come together, because I think there's this culture of, watching Instagram and watching YouTube and watching all this stuff and seeing all these 20 something, success stories, quote unquote success stories, or, whatever it is, these, instant millionaires that are popping up everywhere. And I think for people who get a little bit older, so I just turned 40 last year, I'll be 41 this year. And, I know for people like me, sometimes we're susceptible to seeing that crap and going, oh crap, we sort of screwed this thing up. We did, we're late in life and we blew it. We were supposed to be a millionaire at 26 and it didn't work out. And I think that, growing up, when we grew up as sort of contemporaries, like you mentioned earlier, there was sort of a time before Google. And I think that time before Google allowed us to grow up and live a life without these expectations being set by other people. And so, but now it's really difficult for people growing up. Obviously they're seeing all this stuff, they're inundated with it. And then for people like us, we're like, oh my God, we didn't realize that we were supposed to be there, but we're missing it. But based on sort of loose math, it sounds like maybe you were late 30s, almost 40 by the time you published your first book. And that was sort of the...
I was mid 30s. So I'm pretty open.
Okay. Yeah, that was sort of the consensus Mike and I had come to, is that it requires a certain amount of filling of buckets, right? You have to have a certain amount of life experience before you can go out and really, provide something of value. Your book worked because it was built on the back of all your personal experience, all these conversations. And if you'd have tried to write that book at 18, it just wouldn't have worked.
No, not at all. And I think that's a really wise observation. And, success comes in layers. This is something I always tell young people, especially. We have this myth. There's this myth of sort of, all of a sudden everything just happened and suddenly you're successful. But the reality is, success more often than not. Now, occasionally that happens, but more often than not, it comes in layers. It's that by the time you get to the place where you're like writing and publishing a book, that's just the next thing to do. It doesn't feel like some monumental breakthrough. It's just, I've been working on this for years and years and years and years. And now I'm codifying it into a book, and now it's being published. And that's just the next thing. That's just the next step. It doesn't feel like some monumental breakthrough. And that's true in many careers, And so I think, and if you look at the statistics, it's really interesting. Look at the statistics of funded companies in Silicon Valley. The ones that are often the ones that are the most successful typically are ones that are founded by people who have had one or two or three other companies under their belt. They've failed, they've learned all their hard lessons. And then maybe their third company that they start in their late 30s, typically early 40s, is the one that really takes off because they've seen all the patterns. They've connected all the dots and they realize, oh, okay, there are some pitfalls I have to be careful not to fall into. And so when you're young, everything seems very black and white. Everything seems very clear. Well, this is what we need to do, or you're getting it wrong. And I was that way in my 20s. Like I thought I knew everything in my 20s. It was only with a little bit of maturity that I suddenly realized that things are actually a little more gray than I often give them credit for. And the precision with which we can describe that grayness is what makes us a great creative and a great leader, right? The ability to kind of look into the gray and also to see patterns at the same time and to say, okay, here's what seems to be going on here. I think that's what makes us great creatives and makes us great leaders ultimately. And so I think that's a really astute observation you make that, we should, I always tell young people, like, go pick a company and work there for 10 years. And then you'll know a lot more about yourself. You're going to know a lot more about what you're good at, about the places you add value. And then if you do that, if you just commit to that for a decade, just pouring yourself into some place, adding value wherever you can, at the end of that, you're probably going to have a lot of options because you're going to A, you're going to know yourself better, but B, you're going to prove to people around you that you're the kind of person who sticks around and adds value, which is something that's kind of rare in the world today.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that you brought up that fact that go work somewhere for 10 years and then kind of go from there, because coming from a musical background similar to yours and starting a creativity podcast, I don't know anything about creativity. I'm not a pro in this, but having you, before you wrote Accidental Creative, you spent 10 years in a creative firm and got your feet wet and then wrote the book. And so it makes me feel better knowing that, like you didn't just jump out from, being in a band to writing an amazing book on creativity. You actually went and did the work and got the background on that first.
Well, the interesting thing is too, when I think one of the things that people say about the stuff that I've written, and I'm really grateful that they say this, because this is probably what means more to me than anything, is that it's very precise. That I'm saying things that don't sound like vague platitudes, but sound like meaningful specifics. And that's because these are things I was beating my head against the wall trying to deal with when I was actually, sort of in the trenches day to day, trying to lead a team, trying to figure out where the next idea is going to come from, trying to, deal with all the personality conflicts and all the great times. And how do we celebrate when something goes well, or do we just move on? Or what do we, these are the specific types of situations. So often people will say to me, do you have a camera on the wall of our office? How is it that you're writing about the stuff, And the reality is no, it's just that, things are way more common than we think they are. These dynamics are way more, we always think we're the only ones dealing with something until somebody begins to point out that pretty much everybody's dealing with some of the same stuff, right? Now, the way it plays out is different, but the underlying governing dynamics are often very similar. So, it's kind of an interesting thing. So I'm really glad you said that. I think with experience comes precision. With maturity comes precision. The ability to be able to see things and call them what they are, rather than just speaking in big platitudes. It's why a lot of times I will read books and I'll just say it just doesn't feel like there's anything here, because it just feels like a rehash of all the things that have already been said. But there's no meaningful specific. And I think the best thing we can do as a creative is be precise in how whatever it is we're doing.
You actually, I was listening to another interview where you were on, and you brought up the fact that when you write, you actually write to someone. Like you pick someone and you're writing to that one person. And that you mentioned that that's actually why a lot of people will come to you and say, hey, is there a camera on the wall? Are you watching me? In reality, you're writing to that one person, and it helps kind of frame your book.
Yeah. And I've done that with every book, and I do it with every podcast. I imagine a specific person sitting across the desk from me when I'm writing, and I write the book to that specific person. And to your point, I think that really makes a difference in terms of, and by the way, that's not just writing books. That's creating anything. We tend to try to use avatars or customer profiles or things like that, which are these sort of, these kind of where we try to combine a bunch of people into sort of a demographic or a psychographic. And that can be useful. I just find it a lot more meaningful and compelling when you think about a specific person and you create for that person. I think your work's going to be a lot more precise that way. And so anybody, if you're making music, if you're designing, if you're writing, if you're building a business, think about it with that kind of precision. It's going to really help the creative endeavor for sure.
Yeah. So your morning regiment is what legends are made of. How was your oatmeal this morning?
You really have done your research, for real. I actually have changed my breakfast, believe it or not,
really?
For the last 2.5 years. I think I actually do almond butter and toast instead of oatmeal. But everything else is the same. The coffee, same mug. Got the same mug I've used forever. And I've got 2 of them actually, because I love the mug so much. And so I rotate them day to day, but it's the same mug. I go to my office, I sit down with my breakfast, I study for an hour, typically in the morning. Days when I'm traveling, sometimes, my regiment's a little different, but I'm not traveling much these days. So so it's, and I study for an hour and I spend time reflecting on what I'm reading. And that's been my habit since 2000, or my morning ritual since 2002. Is when I began that ritual, and it's made all the difference in the world. It really gained some clarity.
Can you talk about starting that process, how you figured out, like, I need to do this, I have to do this every day, and then your dailies as well. I mean, how do you go from, I'm slacking off playing in a band to every day I get up at X time and I do this every day, and we can see the rewards of doing that. I mean, it's not easy to publish 4 books in such a short amount of time, but obviously what you're doing is working. Yeah.
So to your point, I think when I was in my 20s, when I was playing in a band, I mean, I was out late. I would sleep in late, typically, or I was on the road. I was traveling. I was, it was a very unstructured life, and I got to experience that and live that for a number of years. And like a Tuesday would pass, and I'd say, well, I'll just do that tomorrow. I don't really have any reason to worry about that today. I've got tomorrow to work on that, or what. It just felt like there wasn't necessarily any sort of meaningful progress happening. And so when I sort of first planted my feet in what it feels like to like actually work for an organization, lead a team, all of that kind of stuff, I realized like that approach is just not going to work for me. I have to be more disciplined about my life. And I knew that when I was in my 20s too, but it's different when everything is vague and it doesn't feel like you understand what you're working toward necessarily. So, that was when I began to sort of look at some people around me and say, okay, what are they doing that's different from what I'm doing? And one of the things I noticed is that they had regular rituals, they had regular habits, regular patterns. And so one of those habits, one of those patterns was study. I noticed that a lot of the people around me tended to read a lot. And I thought, okay, well, if I want to be like them, I think I'm going to have to probably start doing the same thing. And that was where it came from. And so there was a period when my kids were really young, and they would get up earlier. So my kids used to get up at, 6:30 because they were kids. I would get out of bed at like 5 a.m, and just so I could get an hour of studying before my kids got out of bed. And then I had to get them ready, and then I had to go to work and all that stuff. So that was for a number of years. I would get up at 5:30 and study for an hour before work. Now my kids are teenagers. They're all sort of late teenagers. And so they get up, they take care of themselves and all that. So I've give myself a little bit of the gift of an extra, half hour of sleep, which is kind of nice. But yeah, I mean, that really sort of began way back then. And then I was reading a lot at the time about disciplines and practices. And I started reading about monasteries and monks, and how monks have sort of daily rituals that they engage in. They call them the dailies. I thought, it's probably not a bad idea to have a set of daily practices that I just engage in. And so I've got a set of daily practices that I do every single day, and I check them off, and I've got like a checklist for those dailies. Now I've got, years of checked off boxes for each month. I can kind of see where they are, but it's things like studying, it's things like meditating, it's things like writing every day, making progress on what I'm working on. I do an active business development every day, just as a matter of habit, just to make sure that every day I'm doing something to plant seeds that could lead to future business. Every day I have a meaningful conversation with each of my kids. It's something I strive to do and check off the list every day. So there are just these sort of daily things that, that if I didn't do them every day, is the world going to fall apart? No. But if I don't do them for enough days in a row, things start to erode. And so really the dailies are just about maintaining the important stuff in your life and making sure that you're not letting things slip for too long, like they did for me when I was in my 20s, right? It wasn't that any given day was necessarily disastrous. It's just that if you string enough of those days in a row along where you say, yeah, I'll do that tomorrow, then you're kind of pushing everything off to the future. And so I learned a lot of lessons actually during that time I sort of look back, and it's funny because I kind of jokingly tell my kids, I call them my misguided 20s, which I mean, they weren't. It's fine. It was fine. We all have to do that. I think I'm glad I sort of tried. I'm glad made a run at that, because now I don't have to I don't have to wonder, I don't have to ask questions about like, what if I had done this or that or whatever. So, I think it's really good. I mean, I think if you're in your early 20s and you got an idea to go do something, you should go try it, go try it and see, because you never know, and you have so little to risk when you're in your early 20s. Typically, it's a lot harder when you're in your mid 30s, when you've got a family and a mortgage and all that. There's a lot more of a calculus involved. But it's funny because when you're in your early 20s, you think you have so much to risk, and you really don't have much to risk, And so I spent 5 years, like chasing something, and then, it didn't work out, and that's great. It worked out for some of my friends, which is great too. But now, I look back and I'm like, okay, that all served a very important purpose in my life. It really taught me a lot. A, about being on stage, B, about, what it means to be creative on demand. When you're performing, when you're writing, when you're on stage in front of maybe a couple thousand people at a time, like, you're there, you're like in the spot, you got to figure it out. You don't have the luxury of like, hey, let me go in the studio and figure this out, and then I'll come back out later and play something for you. It's like, no, these people are here. They didn't come to see me. They came to see, the Dixie Chicks or Toby Keith. I'm like the opening act, like nobody is there. So I've got to figure out how to capture their attention. I can figure out how to be creative in the moment. So all of that served its purpose, but I'm also really glad that I kind of moved beyond that at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's really useful information. And actually, in these last few minutes with you, I wondered if you could just talk about maybe more globally or from maybe a business management perspective, the importance of routine. This is something that, I too have done for a long time. I've been, working for myself since about 2000. And so for these last, 20 years, I've basically been working from home or working, remotely from one location or another. And for me, routine has always been huge. Getting up, getting dressed, showering. I mean, my wife hates it because I wear my shoes all day, but by wearing my shoes, I feel like I'm at work, right? I'm not just loafing at the house. And so, but I get up in the morning, I get ready, and I've always done that as a way to, I guess, sort of, act as if you're going to work. I later, in the last couple, maybe 2-3 years, have added to that some of the things like you're describing, study and other things like that. But I wonder if you would just talk about it from sort of a business perspective, the importance of routine, A, for, people working from home, especially now during COVID and all this stuff, this is a really common experience, but the importance of maintaining sort of routine and some semblance of normalcy while we're working from home. And also just, if you work for yourself or whatever.
Yeah, I absolutely love that you do that. I love that that's part of your daily routine. Gretchen Rubin once said, what you do every day matters more than what you do once in a while. And I think those are very wise words. So the way that you treat each day is the way that you treat your life. And so right now, especially in the midst of COVID, when we're working remotely, when every social interaction is actually a transaction, because, I click and we connect, and then I click and you're gone. I could just be done with you. I could do it right now. I'm not going to. I could do it right now. I can just click and you're gone. Our life can just feel like a never ending stream of transactions versus meaningful interactions, meaningful conversations. The things that make us human that we often get when we're sort of in a workplace or we're out and we're interacting with people and all of that. So right now, rhythm is a way of keeping us grounded in our humanness, in our humanity. We are wired for rhythm. We're not wired for every day to feel the same, to get out of bed wearing the same clothes, sit in front of a camera wearing the same clothes, go to bed wearing the same clothes. There's no peak, there's no trough. It's just that every day is the same. That's what it kind of is right now. So building rituals kind of gives us a sense of rhythm, a sense of ebb and flow, and like, this is who we are and this is what we do. And we're working towards something in the future that is meaningful. It helps us with our sense of optimism. Why study if you don't feel like there's some better possible future for you? If you don't feel like there's some way in which that planting those seeds is going to eventually yield a garden that's full of fruit. I mean, why would you do that? And so it just reminds us that we're made for more than just existence. We are. That's what I think practices and rituals does for us.
Yeah,
that's great.
I know you have a heart out, and we're approaching that right now. Feel free to cut me off, but I actually have one more question if you have time. I noticed as I was preparing for this interview, I went back and I listened to most of your books, and I noticed that as you were writing Accidental Creative and Die Empty and then Louder Than Words, in Die Empty, it almost sounds like you were writing louder than words at the same time. Do you do that? Do you double up and kind of get an idea and you're developing another book? Can you go over your writing process? I heard you use an app like Scribs to kind of move stuff around and just you have a 5,000 word maximum, not a minimum. Just go over your writing process for us and tell us, how the first book kind of enabled you to write the rest, because that's kind of a trend.
So I write in a program called Scrivener. I write my books from the inside out. I don't write them front to back. I write whatever section that day that I happen to be interested in writing. I only write 500 words a day maximum. That's all. I don't write any more than that. Some people write when they're inspired. I'm more of a sort of, I show up Monday through Friday every day and I write 500 words. I know if I do that in 2 weeks, I have a chapter. In 6 months, I have a rough draft. In a year, then I've got like a draft that I can turn into my publisher. That's kind of the way it goes for me. I believe firmly that you don't write a book, you write a word, you write a sentence, you write a section at a time. People find it daunting to write a book, but you don't have to write a book. You just have to write a section. A book becomes what it becomes as you write it a section at a time. Yes, I am. The seeds of my next book are always discovered in the book that I just finished writing. I mean, the last line of the last paragraph of the Axon Creative was about Die Empty, that story, and then that became the next book. And then Die Empty had significant themes of discovering your voice in it, and that became the next book. And then, Louder Than Words. Well, I would say Herding Tigers is really more sourced in. Sort of all three of those first three books, but they sort of yielded Herding Tigers, which is all of that from kind of a leadership perspective. So, I think whatever you're working on right now, very often you'll find the seeds of the next book in whatever, the next project in whatever you're doing right then.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time. Do you want to tell people where they can find you and how they can reach out?
Yeah, probably the easiest thing is toddhenry.com, or you can listen to the Accidental Creative podcast. Been around since 2005, just crossed 10 million downloads. So it was kind of a fun, cool milestone a couple months ago. Toddhenry.com is the best place to find me.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Todd. We really appreciate your time and really grateful for the information you provided, not only here, but the stuff that you put out in your books. It's a great content for everybody who is in any aspect of creative life, regardless of what you think that might be. So whether it's music or it's art or design or business or whatever, like we discussed earlier, there's this creative juice that lives in all of us. And I think Todd's books speak to that.
Thanks again.
Thank you, guys.
So, that was Todd Henry. A really cool interview with him. He had a heart out, so we had to only go a half hour with him, and our shows normally go an hour. And I'm going to email him back and try and get another interview out of him at some point.
I think we've got to, because honestly, as you guys heard in the interview, it was an incredible conversation. And, I feel like we covered a lot of territory. We talked a little bit about sort of his early days, but I feel like it could almost be a 3-part series, right? We got into the discussion of sort of his early years and this amalgamation of experiences that led to writing the first book, The Accidental Creative. But I think that there's so much more digging to do also. And I would love to, keep that conversation going. Yeah, it's unfortunate that we only had 30 minutes with the guy, but really grateful for the time. It was a great visit.
Yeah, I feel like we were just getting into the meat of the conversation when we had to kind of cut it.
It's one of those things. This is a little bit of pulling back the curtain, but when we typically are doing an interview with somebody, we have a few minutes of kind of warm up. We can kind of talk to them and say, hey, welcome to the show. We're going to do X, Y, and Z. Let's talk about this, that, and the other thing. That kind of thing, and we can kind of pregame and get warm, right? Start to gel a little bit, right? Because so much of having a conversation is being able to sort of talk with people as if you know them, right? We've obviously not met Todd before, but we feel like we are, we know him through his writing and things like that. But I mean, it's not a personal experience. But with Todd, and this is sort of the nature of these sort of hard stop and hard start kind of relationships, is he comes on and then there's no time afterwards to kind of say, hey, thanks, thanks for that. Great job. Back pat, I really enjoyed that talk, and we didn't have any of that. Unfortunately, it was just sort of an abrupt end. I think he probably had another call or something right back to back. And, and like Mike said, I'm hopeful he'll come back on and maybe do a little longer form discussion with us, or maybe we can figure out a way to do something with his podcast, or, maybe we can do an article or write something together or something. I don't know. It would be cool to find some other way to collaborate with him.
I know he's working on, more books, and next time he puts one out, I'm definitely going to reach out for an interview request regarding the book. So we can
absolutely
do that again.
Well, and, and I think maybe that's something you and I can talk a little bit about, or I mean, there's maybe a couple points that I think would be worth sort of, exploring a little longer form that came from that conversation. I mean, first of all, we sort of ended the conversation with this discussion of routine and sort of the value of routine. And I think that that's something worthwhile sharing in terms of, if people are working from home right now, or if they're self-employed or entrepreneurial, or not. I mean, maybe just, you go to work for somebody, but you can sort of set your day up a certain way. I think his point about being intentional in how we sort of prepare for the day, and having these rhythms. I'm not as familiar with, you mentioned his dailies, but his ideas of, getting up in the morning, taking some time to study, taking some time to, write each day, things like that. I try and do something similar using these. And we've talked about these before, the Pomodoros, these little 15-minute blocks of time, or are they 25-minute blocks of time? And so I do that in the morning. I get up in the morning, I shower, I get cleaned up, I get dressed for the day. And like I mentioned in the interview, I wear my shoes all day. And I sit down and I do 2 Pomodoros of reading. So I'll sit down and I'll read some book for 2 Pomodoros, so about an hour by the time you factor in breaks and stuff. And then after that, I'll go to the office and I'll sit down and write or do email or try and put together articles or whatever in that next, I'll do a 4 Pomodoro stint then. So I'll have a 2-hour, run in the morning where I do that kind of thing. And I found that by having these sort of ritualized, structured things, 2 things have happened. 1, I'm getting more done, but 2, and maybe this is, where doing something like this, building these rituals could be of real value to you, is I'm at the point now where if I don't do my rituals in the morning, I kind of get this sinking feeling in my gut, like I screwed up, like I'm not doing the thing I'm supposed to be doing. And, I've actually sort of built a habit out of it. And I think that you could use that as something to, I don't know, propel your day or begin your day. If you're trying to get something done, anything done, write a book or start a podcast, whatever it is you want to do. I think by developing some of those early rituals, after a little while, you develop that momentum that just keeps it moving. And I think having momentum really helps you get stuff done.
Well, actually, Todd, I think it's Die Empty, he talks about a comedian that hit up Seinfeld and was like, hey, how do you become a good joke writer? How do you, you're the best in the industry. How did you get there? And Seinfeld replied to him, I write a, and every day, and Seinfeld ended up getting this big calendar he put on the wall that every day he wrote and would develop new material, he would put an X on the day. And as you look at the calendar, you can see this long line of X's, and he says, don't break the chain. As long as you don't break the chain and you do it every day, eventually your material is going to progress and you're going to get from A to B a lot quicker. And and
I think that's right. I mean, I've heard other podcasters, Joe Rogan and these types of guys talk about that too, that part of their writing process is basically you have to write every day. And I had that business coach for a little while, that guy, Jonathan Stark, who's sort of a value-based pricing guru. And that was one of his big things too. But what he does is actually takes it to even another level. He sends out an email to his email list every day. So it's not just a matter of writing for your own consumption, but he's actually writing for an audience that will see this every single day. And, and then he takes all those things, but then and stores them on the internet, and those become articles, and then they become searchable, and then they become, all these different things. And so he's figured out a way to not only build a habit of daily writing, but also do it with some stakes, because he doesn't want to publish materials that aren't going to be good enough for his audience. And then those things become SEO searchable objects that he can then use to help drive traffic to his website and to his consulting practice and stuff.
Well, and so one thing that you just brought up there that kind of stands out to me is, and I've noticed this with Todd as well, is he recycles his material in different contexts. So he has a podcast for herding tigers. He has a podcast for accidental creative. He has all these different social platforms set up for each individual book. And then he uses little clips and snippets out of the book to provide the material for that. So by writing the book in the first place, he's developing the content to reuse in his podcast, in his posts on LinkedIn, or his, wherever he's putting material out. And I think that's a really good way to kind of repurpose material. You've already done the thought and the study and the work into it, but you can use it in 4 or 5 different ways to generate SEO, to put on your website, to build traffic. Another thing
I think that's right. The efficiencies, I think, are critical, especially if you're trying to get a lot done in what feels like little time. If you're getting older and you feel like you've got to play catch up or whatever, you can do these kinds of things and be hyper efficient. We do a version of that here with this podcast, which is that we do the show and recently we've begun doing these segments. If you haven't seen them yet, they're called egg drops, but they're basically just a 4 or 5 minute clip pulled from an interview that's, some moment of greatness from our discussion. And
they're very few and far between.
Well, they're always the other people. I find they're never us. What's going on?
Right.
With that? So, but nonetheless, we're trying to be efficient in the fact that we're creating an hour worth of content every week for this show. But what else can we do with it? And so, and this egg drop thing is sort of an example of how people, or how we're multi-purposing the content we create, where, in his case, he starts writing a book, but then he's grabbing little pieces and parts that sort of fuel the next book.
Well, and I almost feel like he kind of uses his audience to bounce stuff off of. Like he'll start thinking about something, write a post about it for his book, and then look and see what people say in the comments or whatever, and then kind of revises it from there. So I think, being an author and being able to write these books, he's actually able to leverage his audience to kind of help him write the book in the process, which is cool.
And I think that, obviously that's something that comes with time and developing some community. And obviously it's something like, here at this show that we're working towards, is building up a community where we can have these kinds of dialogues with people, in the spirit of exactly what you're describing, which is, we want to be able to bounce things off the listeners of this show. And then we would love to hear their feedback, right? Are we doing the wrong thing? Are we saying too often? Are we, whatever it is, like, I want, it's important, I think, to have that feedback because, you can only do what you can do yourself for so long before it starts to feel like, oh, well, this must be okay. It's working or whatever. But, without any kind of feedback, you don't know.
Yeah. I brought it up just in passing and he didn't really cover it that well, but in the conversation, but one of the things that he does in his writing process is he only writes 500 words per day. And that's his maximum. So once he hits 500, he's done. He doesn't go to 501. He just stops where he's at. And he calls that ending with the beginning in mind. And that to me is really kind of interesting because, most people, when they get into a project, they just bury through it and get it going. And he says that by, they get in a flow state and just keep going. He says by cutting it off at 500 words, the next day when he starts, he knows exactly where he wants to be. And he has a whole day to kind of think about progressing from there. So it's kind of an interesting concept. I never thought of that.
Yeah, it's interesting, because especially like as part of my daily writing practice, I'm exactly what you described, what you just said there with, this idea that you want to barrel through and you want to get it done. So I'll sit down and start writing an article, but I don't want to wait until tomorrow to finish. I want to get it done today. So instead I'm late getting started to my next project or, whatever, because I, want to finish my article. And most of the articles I'm publishing are somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 words. And so I'm rocking through 2,000 words every day. Well, I wish it was every day. I haven't been that prolific, but but when I sit down to write, I sit and I'll write a lot, and so, but I like that idea of sort of breaking yourself off mid consciousness or mid thought and then resuming the next day. The other thing I like about that is it's sort of, I guess maybe it's more attainable too. Like if you were trying to reach 1,000 words every day or 2,000 words a day for your average writer, that's probably more than they want to do. 500 words, I don't know exactly what it is, but let's say it's 4 or 5 paragraphs, right? It's pretty doable for most people. And, if you had a higher target, something in the thousands or something per day, I mean, unless you're a professional author, like you just don't have the time to commit to that. It's a big time commitment. I think by breaking it into a more bite-sized chunk, it's easier for people to do and stick to. And so I think that that's a valuable thing.
Well, I think the reflection part of it's important too, because, there's been many times where I've typed this long ass email out and hit send. And when, why the hell did I hit send? I need to think about that before I hit send. And same thing for writing an article or a publication or a book. Don't just get it done and move on to the next chapter. Work on it, think about it, and then finish it. I think that's a critical step that a lot of people might overlook.
Yeah, no, and I'm for sure guilty of that too. I mean, I'm a notorious long email writer too, and so, but it's the same thing. I mean, half the time, if you do take the time to stop and reflect, you go, "What am I doing? Like, I could say all this in 3 sentences, or we should just get on the phone, or maybe I was pissed when I started writing this, and now I'm not pissed, so I could probably not send this." Or whatever. Maybe it was cathartic to get it out, but now that it's out, it's not important that the other person gets that email. No. So I think it's a valuable thing, but I think you're right. I think that reflection bit is maybe the critical piece of the puzzle. It's not so much about the writing as it is about reflecting on what you wrote.
Yeah. So you were listening to Diempty as well. Did you notice that he brought up a documentary called Searching for Sugar Man?
Yeah, and I don't know if you've seen it.
I watched it last night. It's amazing.
Did you really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's very good. It's funny. I saw it at a friend's house in Spain, and most of them don't speak much English, so it was really more for me than for them. But it was I think it's a pretty amazing story, actually.
Yeah.
And for people who haven't seen it, and hopefully I'm not screwing this up. Hopefully I'm not mixing it up with something else. But basically, it's about this musician, and he
Bob Dylan kind of.
Yeah. And he became sort of a star in South Africa.
Yep.
And then kind of disappeared. Like it was unknown to him.
The thing is he didn't even know that he was popular in South Africa.
His music. And it's almost like what Todd was just describing with his podcast, how he went back to iTunes and discovered that his show was trending. He didn't even know that he was finding success as a podcaster. He wasn't looking for it. And that was sort of the deal with this Finding Sugar Man, is this guy went on to be wildly successful in South Africa. Yet meanwhile, nobody knew where he was. They couldn't track down the guy.
They thought that he committed suicide on stage. Like there was this rumor that he was dead and that he, just offed himself in this glorious manner to give it to the man kind of thing. But he was alive, working in Detroit, doing contractor work, framing houses and, removing debris and stuff like that. And meanwhile, he's more popular than Elvis in Cape Town and he doesn't even know. And so 30 years later goes by, and then he finds out, this guy's like, what happened to this guy that's huge in Cape Town, guy from Cape Town? What happened to him? No one knows anything about him. No one knows anything at all. And so he started this kind of quest to find this performer. And 30 years later, this guy goes to Cape Town for the first time and hasn't played in years and is playing in front of 20, 30,000 people and sells out 6 shows in a row. And could you when he got on stage and saying, I actually teared up. I cried a little.
Yeah, no, it's a pretty impactful movie. It really is. And I had heard a lot about it prior to hearing it. I will say I admittedly didn't get deep enough into Diempty to hear that part. How did he tie all that together?
He brought it up in conversation, and it was right at the end. I was ending my day, and so I was like, well, screw it, I'll watch this documentary. So I kind of got to that point, was like, let's check this out, and then shut the book off. So I don't we'll have to go check it out. I will say though, one thing I did pull out of Diempty was this idea of mapping, making, and meshing. These are sort of 3 components of
I guess, leadership or running your business or goal setting or, whatever your project is, that you need to sort of have each of these three little buckets. And I had really hoped to go into a conversation with Todd about it, because it seems to me that I fall into some of the trappings of this thing, which is I skip mapping, I don't worry about meshing, and I go right into making. And I think that's, part of it is my training, right? I've always been in art and design and things like that. And so people always come to me with instruction and then I produce, right? So I've always been in this producer role. And yet what he's saying, and with this mapping and making stuff, is that mapping is basically taking the time to lay out what it is you're going to do. It's the work before you do the work, right? And notoriously, this is a hard step for me. I just want to get to it. I get so excited, I get right to it. I don't want to sit and think about all that. And so, but he mentions in the book that it's it's a critical component of this. Basically, if you were driving from Los Angeles to New York and you didn't even know what you were doing, you might meander the great lower 50 before you found yourself in New York City. But by having that end in mind and knowing where you're going, it's much easier to sort of plan it out. And so I think it's important to do that. It's a skill I need to continue to work on. Yeah. The making component is obviously that it's, sitting down and actually doing the work. And the meshing part I was just getting into, so I'm not as familiar with that bit, but the meshing had something to do with sort of exploring the gray area. So there's the black and white of, I'm going from Los Angeles to New York and this is my route. So there's your map. Making is actually getting in the car and doing the drive. But as I understand it, and maybe I'm screwing this up, but the meshing is sort of this looking at the in-between and looking for ways to improve or be more efficient. So maybe, on your drive, you find there's a route that's a little bit faster, or you skip the world's largest ball of yarn and that saves you half an hour, or, whatever it is. And I think that this idea of sort of exploring these gray areas in between and being able to adapt and move, I believe is sort of what he was trying to get into with the meshing. And I would have liked to have that conversation with him. However, I will go back and listen to the book, I guess, or finish up the book.
Yeah. If you get a chance, out of all of his work, I think Louder Than Words is probably my favorite book. So if you get a chance to listen to that, it's great. Essentially, he talks about developing your authentic self and, setting not goals, but just standards for yourself and being authentic with everything that you do. And I was kind of struggling with that when I read it the first time. And I was like, I play music, I go to bars, I drink, and I play music. That's me. And I was floating around, didn't have any purpose in life. And it kind of was just an eye opener for me when I read that book and was able to kind of just figure it out. Well, no, I think that's really important. I think a lot of us, and I'm totally guilty of this. I think we make a lot of our decisions based on what we think people expect of us, which doesn't necessarily allow us to be, authentic or quote unquote authentic, be ourselves, because we're busy trying to aspire to or attain or behave in such a way as somebody else, the other, expects of us. And so, I've struggled with this a little bit. I've been, fiddling with the idea of career pivots or moving around and doing something different in my career. But what I keep getting drawn back to is I'm a creative, I'm a designer, I'm a this, this is what people know me as. And so if I was to all of a sudden be, I don't know, a sheep farmer, like that would feel really out of left field, right? Like this is not what people know me for. So how could I be a good sheep farmer? I'm not known for that. Yeah. And so, but that expectation really doesn't have to do with anything, right? It's me saying that people think this about me, therefore I must act this way. When really all that matters, back to that point of authenticity, is that I do what I need to do, or that what I want to do, and do the things that please us, and I know that you've struggled with this too, especially trying to figure out even yourself or your identity as a DJ, right? I mean, I remember years ago when we were, when you had decided that you were going to start using DJ Ontic and, start doing this thing and try and build this persona up around this DJ that you were becoming. I remember that you and I had lots of discussions about sort of this feeling fake or this, imposter syndrome, where you felt like you were doing one thing, but it wasn't true, like it was somehow this idea of seeing yourself as the personality was a struggle. Yeah, that is still a struggle. And I mean, I've literally had panic attacks going on. Like I did a wedding. The last gig I did before COVID was for a DJ who's fairly known in Seattle, and he was getting married, and everyone that came to his wedding was club DJs and people in the industry, and it was probably the most stressful gig I've ever done to date, because not only am I, doing a wedding for a good friend, but I'm performing in front of every DJ in Seattle, and I'm getting critiqued by every DJ in Seattle. And it's kind of, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, no, it's true. I mean, like you're saying, it's difficult, and sometimes we feel like it's hard to be ourselves, right? So like when you're going out as DJ Ontic, you can use that sort of as a shield to protect yourself. Like I do this a lot with my companies, right? So I always speak in sort of the royal we, right? It's always we do this, we do that. Half the time I'll slip, and my wife's like, "What? You and the mouse in your pocket? Like, what are we talking about with this we business?" And but that was a thing. And as somebody who was kind of insecure and not sure I was making the right choices or whatever, it was easier for me to just say, "Oh yeah, the company R2 is doing this," instead of Ryan Rogar is doing this. And and so for my ability to sort of shift it off, that was useful. And however, now in retrospect, part of that was me sort of hiding my authenticity, and again trying to live up to the expectation of others. And so this is something that's really a struggle for a lot of people, I'm sure. But one thing I wanted to say about your situation in particular, I've seen you perform. I mean, obviously we've been friends for a really long time, and you've performed at events that I've been a part of, and I've seen you perform at other things. I think that we are notorious for underestimating our abilities too. I think, you came into a room like that where you were full of industry people and all that stuff. And if you told me you were doing that, I would go, "Oh, cool. That's going to be awesome. You're going to do amazing. You're going to go out there. You're going to rock the hell out of these guys, and it's going to be sweet." But in your head, you're going, "Oh my God, they're thinking of this. They're judging me. They're doing all these different things, and they've got, you're imposing all this thought, that's coming from these people that, the reality is they're probably busy having their drinks and talking, and they're not that worried about it. But nonetheless, we do this to ourselves a lot. And it's really difficult to find that confidence. Right. And I know that as I've gotten older, and it's been kind of actually a weird regression for me, and I would love to figure out how to stop it, is, I've found that the confidence that I used to rock is starting to wane a little bit. And I'm starting to feel like I'm not as good as I once was, and because I used to feel, very confident in my ability to go out and, be an amazing art director, creative director. And I think what's happening is more so probably this year, and maybe it's a COVID thing, but I found that I'm spending more and more time in my own echo chamber, and I'm not getting external affirmation of how good I am or the quality I was putting out and that kind of thing. And I think because I'm not getting that, and maybe it's just my personality requires a little bit more of that, I've found that my confidence is starting to slip. And then as my confidence starts to slip, I feel like I'm not doing as good in other aspects as I should.
Well, you also have to take into consideration, we're coming on a year now of COVID bullshit that has changed everything. Like, it's hard. It's easy. A year ago, I was all excited, ready to, go forward with, I bought this huge truss setup for lighting and events, and DJing was, on the forefront. And now I spent the last 3 weeks building a website for a landscaping company that I'm starting, because obviously DJing isn't working. So it's like, it's, right now it's kind of like we're almost grasping at straws, trying to figure out what to do next. And you can't really, base decisions off of outside stuff like COVID.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and I would say, I think the other thing to just maybe take it in mind, and maybe we can use this to sort of wrap up, is that I think, at least my impulse is, if something doesn't work, or, like if my business isn't thriving or my whatever, for me, it starts to feel like a failure. It doesn't look like a a pivot in a positive direction. So in your case, like the way you just described it, is DJing's not working, therefore I must go do something else. But I think the fact of the matter is, for anybody who's paid any attention to your social media or anything, you really enjoy doing this landscaping work. This isn't a fallback on something that's not valuable. This is something you actually like doing. And, you built this incredible rock wall and this great paved flagstone driveway at your place. And I mean, it's clearly something you're very good at. And based on the amount of time and hours and effort you put in, I mean, you're also very passionate about. And so I think it's important that we look at our pivots not as, the last thing failed. But I think, and maybe this goes back to Todd's discussion of, he did the music career thing for a little while and then he went on. I don't think it's fair to assess your prior thing as a fail. I think it's more to say, okay, well, that was the stepping stone it took me to get here. And I know it's a little bit cliche, and I've said this before on the show, but one of the little affirmations I use is this idea that it's taken every step I've ever taken to get to where I am today. So basically, it's taken 40 years of good, bad, middle decision making, and we've wound up here maybe having one of our biggest interviews ever. And so to look at anything I've done in the past as some sort of fail or some sort of thing that wasn't good enough, I think is the wrong way to look at it, because ultimately it got me to this discussion today. And I think that discussion, was very worthwhile and very important thing to do. So I think that, as we move and grow and evolve and change, I think it's important that we try to, frame the things that we've done in the past, not as failures, but rather that, I'm going to screw this up. But somebody calls it, what is it? The first step in learning, I think is what it is, or the first action in learning or something like that. And I think that that's pretty astute. It's this idea that, everything we do feeds and contributes to what's next. And I think that's important.
Well, and don't get me wrong. It's not like I'm not going to ever DJ a gig again. But I will tell you this, I'm very selective on what I do as far as playing out. And I think going forward, it's going to be like that as well. I'm only going to do things I want to do. There's a few venues that I've had the opportunity to play at over the years, and it's almost like it's more of a drag going to play than it is. I'm not as passionate about it as I used to. Yeah. And there's a lot of factors that play into that. The state of music right now is one of them. I hate that I have to go. It's not
your favorite era.
That's part of it, to be honest with you. I hate going and having to deal with requests for WAP by Cardi B. And, it's like, come on. But it is what it is. And, landscaping for me is more of like, it'll be interesting to see how this summer goes, because to be honest with you, last summer I was getting ready to kind of do the same thing. And then I ended up going to Nome, and it kind of put a pivot in that, and I put it on hold, and then it's winter, so you can't really do much. And this summer I'm going to hit it really hard. And even if Nome comes up as an option, I don't think I'm going to go, just because I need to get something going.
Yeah, something of your own going.
Yeah.
But I think it's a great thing. And I think, one thing that COVID, despite all the bad, has sort of put in perspective for me, and you sort of just alluded to it, is that we really need to spend the time that we've got doing the things that we love and the things that we want to do, because, going and playing that gig just cause, even if it's for a couple $100 or whatever, I mean, if you're getting paid for it, but it's a gig that sucks, it still may not be worth doing. Your personal happiness and your personal joy and your personal everything else needs to be worth something too. And I think that that's one thing that I know for me, I've noticed through COVID is, obviously my job was very adaptable to working online and going full-time online. But I think that, if there's anything we've learned, is that everything can be taken away at a moment's notice. And if we don't take time and enjoy the things that we enjoy while we've got the opportunity to enjoy them, that we may end up missing out on the stuff we want to do.
Yeah. Well, cool. That was an amazing interview. I really wish we had more time. Wish he was still on the call with us right now.
Yeah, no joke. Well, anyway, but yeah, no, like Mike said, the interview was amazing. Go check, rewind it and listen to it again. And then listen to us. We're profound. We're actually the stars of this show.
Philosophers.
And but that's right. But check him out at toddhenry.com. He said was the best spot to track him down. He's got a bunch of podcasts, articles, blog posts, anything you can imagine he's got over there at toddhenry.com. One little appeal I want to make on behalf of the Eggs Show is, as we've mentioned out loud and have hopefully been alluding to, we're really hoping to build up our community here in 2021. We want to make sure that everybody who listens is involved in one way or another. We'd love to hear from you guys, feedback, critique, positive, negative, guest suggestions, anything you'd like to do to be a part of the show. We'd love to have you. We'd love to get some conversations going on. And right now we'll start with the email, which is just info@eggscast.com. But if you would like to continue this conversation any other place on social networks or whatever, please do. It will have all the links in the notes here at the show.
Alrighty. We'll see you next time.
Absolutely. Thanks to everybody who listened this week and every week. And we'll see you next time.